Good. All right, now that it's 9:15 or 7:15, I'm going to get started with the workshop. So I want to go over what our workshop is going to be talking about mostly. So, whoops, how do I go back? Okay, so mainly it's just an introduction to what a front end is, how it fits in the context of web front ends, and where it falls in the whole web server technology stack. And that's really what I want. I want you to be able to get out of this workshop how a front end is used in today's time. I'm pretty sure all of you are using some sort of front end every day. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the later slides. And also near the end of the workshop, we're going to build a very small example, or we're going to use the example that we've built, and we're going to add some of the elements that make a modern front end or modern web front end work. So what this workshop is not is a database or Node.js REST API workshop. We had our past 2 workshops on those topics, so that's why it's not going to be what we're going to talk about in this workshop. And it's also not a complete HTML and CSS tutorial, because that's mainly of a styling issue. We're going to talk about how HTML works in general, and we're going to bring up some important information that we'll need to move on to scripting our front end using JavaScript. And I highly recommend you investigate HTML and CSS on your own. It's useful to know, even though it's not really a programming language. It's more useful when you just want to see things work. And you could create a very basic website with knowing just those 2 languages. So before we start, this is what I wanted to make sure that you have on your computer. And just make sure you have those installed, or at least installing, while I go through the overview. And you're going to want to click on the front end branch. That's going to be all the code that will be used in today's workshop. So the definition of front end. So does anybody know what it means? I could take take a guess. It's not.
You've probably heard of the term front end. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, what does it make you think? What does this word make you think of?
What the user sees?
Yeah, it's what the user sees. So essentially, a front end is a medium that connects people with systems. So the word front end doesn't necessarily only apply to websites. It also applies to a lot of other software, and it could also mean things that are not related to software. But of course, in our context, our workshop is about web front ends, so it's going to end up being, what we're going to end up talking about is going to be related to the web somehow, some way. So it's pretty broad. So what does medium mean? What does systems mean? And what does people mean? Like, they vary. I might be a little more knowledgeable on how to program versus someone who are not in computer science or just doesn't have any exposure to programming. So the definition could change in context. So I have some examples here. So everybody's favorite website, Facebook. So when you want to go on Facebook, you usually go on like your website's browser or your phone. So you'd usually see something like this if you were alive back a few years ago when smartphones didn't exist. So this would be how you'd use your phone to connect to Facebook or the old browser if you're using Internet Explorer. Back in, I don't exactly know, I just looked up old Facebook website, and that's the picture I got. So the people who connect to it usually, well, nowadays is a little not as, it's not as hip of a website, and everybody now and their grandmas can connect to Facebook. You'll find anyone on Facebook. So a different example would be Twitter. And Twitter actually has this really cool feature that lets you go on it on your text, like through text message. So back in the olden days, like a few years back, you don't need to have a smartphone to go on Twitter. You could just have it sent through text messages. So yeah, people who, hello? People use Twitter, you know, and don't want people to know that they're using iPhones or whatever their agenda is, probably use this feature that Twitter still offers today. Next example, it's you guys, and you guys use your computers every day, but so you are the user, and the system would be your computer, and obviously the medium that you use to communicate with your computer hardware would be the operating system. So these are just examples of front ends, everything in the middle so far. So yeah, stop moving. Okay, so like I said earlier, the past few examples are not really about then the people who used the previous examples didn't really change. But what I want to get at is basically the person who is using the front end could differ. So if I'm using one of these services that are usually for developers to create new apps or websites, these companies would provide an API, which is the front end to using their service for developers. So that's basically the examples. It could change in context, it could change in whatever.
You're like looking at me and getting mixed signals. Don't look at me.
I think I'll just change it myself.
Okay.
Thank you, though. So, yeah. So now about the stack. So what exactly is a tech stack? Tech stacks basically mean you're combining a few programs and applications to create some kind of service or software or system, whatever you're creating. So these are a bunch of the popular products that a lot of people use to create. Okay, there's new people. These are, sorry, I got distracted. Okay, so basically, these are a few of the popular programs that are used to develop web servers or like a service on the web. So front end would refer to the client side, which I don't think there are any here. I guess you could consider Angular and PHP if that works for you. And backend would be a few of these other ones, which include Express, Node.js, and I guess if you include the databases. So a lot of people like to organize them in charts. So this is a very basic one about something called a mean stack, which is using these 4 different programs to create their web server. It's called mean because they're acronyms. It's an acronym for these 4 programs. So this is a little different diagram. And this one I found someone making a diagram for Tumblr's like stack. I can't really figure out what is on the chart itself. It's almost as bad as the user base. But there are a lot of companies who choose different softwares, and they have different charts. So it's not like I understand those, but this is one that I really liked, and it kind of separated the server from the client. So what we're mainly going to focus on is this part, the user's browser. This is where the front end will end up. So now we're on web front ends. So do you want to talk about it a little? Or this is not up to you guys? Okay, I'll just continue. It's fine. So now I'm going to talk about the components that go into a web front end. And nowadays, it's usually your HTML, which defines the structure of your program, and the CSS, which is the styling, and JavaScript is where all of your logic and all of your basically dynamic code that actually are used to make your front end work. And of course, you have your other graphical assets that go into your front end. So if you want to include pictures or videos, you'd also, these basically have a common property where they don't really change unless you make like a drastic update. Those words are pretty vague. The definition to meaning like, does it change often or not, doesn't really, it's up to the developer to choose. So basically traditional websites will have some kind of similar flow to this. There is the user, and then you have your server, and then your database. So the user asks for the website, so that's the top arrow, and then the server will receive a request about the user wanting a website, and then they talk to the database, and then the database hands off the data, and then the server will have the data and then hand everything together with the website assets, so like the HTML, CSS, the JavaScript, whatever pictures, and then some data that they're also passing along. So data could mean like your Facebook posts, like the text that you upload. It could be like data points that you are charting. So it's really flexible, but we'll talk about that later on and what we're going to use for our example. So that was like the traditional way of having websites served to your users. And these few years, there has been a push to a more modern implementation. And it's not necessarily modern that like it's newly invented. It's been around for a while, but I guess a better word would be like alternative. So the way that they set it up is they have the user talk to the server, and then the server hands off a file, and then all of the static assets, and then the static assets, like your the structure of your page is already sent to the server. So imagine like you downloading an app, and every time on your phone, you're just opening the app, and the app will talk to whatever other server, and then they'll hand off data to your app, and it'll load on your app. So this is kind of like the method websites would do if this is more on like for your like browser-based implementation. That's a better way to describe it. So basically, on the user's end, it'll be 2 requests instead of 1, because before we had 1 cycle, and now this other way would be 2 cycles because it has to go back and forth. But the benefit of using this method is that the user first gets to see something in case like there's a really slow load time and your database has a lot of information that you might not want the user to see yet until they ask for it. So I know that might not mean a lot to you guys because it really depends on whatever application you're working on. But this is just a different way of having all of the data sent. And this is mainly what our workshop is going to be based on. It's based on this implementation. And I believe I have a diagram for that later on. So for that, I'll go into kind of like an example from the user's perspective. So I'm going to use Google's website as an example. And basically, the user will open up their page, and this is just Google's like default search page. That's not their home page. It's just it looks like that if you just have that specific page open. But this example works better. So before they type anything, they want to look for anything, there's just an empty page, right? So after you type in something, it would load the information that you requested. So if I do a Google search, then the web page will ask information based on whatever I typed in that box. And then it'll ask for the server's information, and then the server will finally give the data back to my website's, my user's website page. So imagine this is like 2 separate requests, like the diagram that I showed you earlier. And so just to reiterate, there's an empty page, and then you finally, once you ask for some information from the server, the page will send the request to the server again, and then you'll finally put all the information that you got on the server back onto the page. Is anybody confused about how that works? This is just a very basic Google search, so I don't know how much simpler I could make it. Okay, so before I get started on what Ajax is, if you've caught what the diagram says, we're going to talk a little bit more about HTML and CSS. So let's have Harshita and Doris talk about it.
Okay. I didn't know we were talking about it. All right. Okay.
Yeah, so.
Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So I'm just going to explain basically the difference between an ID and a class. And so let's say you're going to an ice cream shop, and each flavor. Hello? Hi. Okay, sorry. I didn't know I was supposed to talk like this. Okay, louder. Hello? I was like, what is this recording? Oh, it's just recording. Okay, so. So sorry. Okay, so yeah, ID versus class. So I'm going to go basically through what an ID is first. And basically, it's sort of like I don't know if you've ever done this if you have Chrome, but you can basically go through the HTML of the page, and like each little box is called an element. And inside of it's what has like an ID or class, and it's basically like the style of the box, you know. Is it a cool element or is it like a not so cool element? I don't know. But anyways, yeah, so an ID is just basically it has to be very specific, very unique to the specific thing, and it can't be replicated inside any, I don't know, right? Yeah, you can only use it once, so it's like, it's a use once only thing, so don't reuse it. But a class, you can keep reusing it, and you can use it multiple times. So I want to say that it's sort of like, you know, there's one ice cream, but there are many flavors of ice cream. I don't know. I liked food, so when I was thinking of what the difference between a class and a ID, that's what I thought of. I'm sorry. All right, so basically you can have multiple classes inside of an element, but you can only have one ID. But you can, in an element, you can also use both a class and an ID. I don't know. So it can be like strawberry ice cream, or it can be blueberry ice cream, you know, all the ice creams. But you can't have a strawberry blueberry ice cream because that's messed up. You can only have one flavor, okay? All right, that's an ID.
All right, so I'm just going to talk about div, which is basically like division, like not like the arithmetic, but it's like just divides your code. It's a container unit. That means like if you have like lots of lines of code and you want to like have different styles for different parts of code, you use div. So what it does is it divides your HTML code into different sections and format them with CSS. So let's say you have, like they don't have a lot of code here, but there's a sidebar, there's main, and there's a header, and you want to style all of them differently. Let's say you want the header to be like blue in color, or just anything about like styling or animation. You wrap your data into divs, and then you style them in the CSS part. So go next. Right, so let's say this is your code, and then there's a header, main, and footer, and you want it to like look like this. So you give them IDs, which is like unique. So this only has this ID. Same thing with main and header. And you want to change how each of them looks. So that's when, so we want to style them differently to be able to distinguish easily. So basically, you just give them a unique identity, and then you use that identity, which is your ID name, in CSS. So you go next. And then this is like a sample CSS code. Like, I don't know if you guys are, how many of you are familiar with HTML and CSS?
Okay, good, a majority.
Okay, majority. If you're not, definitely look into it. It's pretty easy and like really basic for like making a website or just like apps. So this is CSS, and can you go back? One slide. So you know how you have ID footer? The way you declare an ID in CSS is using a hashtag. Next slide. So hashtag footer, and then you give it a certain height and width, and then you change the background color. So basically, that's what IDs are used for. CSS styles them, and in HTML, you just divide them. Is it clear? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now into the final bit of getting our web front end to work is JavaScript and Ajax. So JavaScript is just a programming language, just like Java or Python, and I'm pretty sure you guys are exposed to that. If you're not, then it's a programming language. And Ajax isn't really a programming language. It's more of like a method of communication between a website or a client that has like internet connectability and the web server. So Ajax would, back to our alternative implementation diagram, Ajax will be used on this bottom part. So the first part will just be a regular website request, and the second part will be Ajax. And what we're going to use for our code in our workshop will just be jQuery. So it's a browser JavaScript library. Libraries are basically pre-written code that helps you speed up development. It has a lot of features, but unfortunately, it has a lot of features. So it's pretty big. Unless you are using the entire jQuery library, it's almost overkill most of the time. But for our purposes and ease of usability, we'll just use jQuery. All right. So I want you guys to start up the server. What does update the database file mean? Okay, you're not updating a database file. You're just going to go into the server directory in the repo you just cloned or downloaded, and you're going to type npm start on your console. So we're going to come around and help you guys with that if you can't get it to work. Don't take a picture of that. It's wrong. All right, so
The presentation will be uploaded.
yeah, we'll upload the presentation. So if you guys missed anything, or yeah, and the video also. So if you missed anything, just you could go back to it in the future. And all of the mistakes in the slides will be fixed, obviously, after the presentation. So yeah, we'll come around to make sure everybody's server is started on their computer. So we'll take about 2-3 minutes for that. Just call it. Yeah, if they're.
Know if you should use command prompt? Yeah, or that's an option at least.
You can use command prompt, or if you might have git bash installed, that's another option. If you have
Yeah. Can you guys like help them?
Yeah. Does anyone need help?
Raise your hand if you don't have your server started. If you're not sure that your server started, please call someone over. Wait, hold on, sorry. right, so before we run out of time, I'm just gonna get started. Yeah, server folder, and then run npm install, and then run npm start after that's done. Okay, so, all right, before we run out of time, I'm just gonna continue. So if you can't get it working, just, sure. And I'll also help people after, so at least get it set up on your computer at the very least. So we're going to talk about the HTTP requests. So this is kind of like how browsers would talk to servers. It's based on these HTTP requests. And the most commonly used types of HTTP requests are get and post. So can anybody tell me what get and post does? If you've taken 191 or 115, you would know this. Yeah, we also went over it before. Yeah.
Get receives data and post sends data.
Perfect. So in case you didn't hear him, get receives data from the server, post lets you send information to the server. So these are examples of how it's done in jQuery. So you're not actually going to have to write the code. You're just going to I basically removed this link and the data part from the code base that you downloaded, and later on you just need to replace it for it to work. And these are the routes that are part of the server. So this is kind of what the last workshop was about. It was creating these. So this workshop, we're using them. And these are the routes that are given to you from the previous workshop. The get for task gets you all of the tasks that are currently on the server. Get task given an ID of the user gets you all of the tasks from that user. Post with the ID of the user. Post for task and the ID of the user will let you send a new task onto the server for that user. User just gets you all of the users that are part of the server, and get user will get you all of the, wait, I actually don't know what that means.
What's wrong, Angus?
What does get user ID do?
That's just if you want to grab a specific ID.
Oh, it lets you find. No, I know what I mean. I know what it does. It lets you find if the user exists on the server, and post user ID lets you create a new user. So if that was a lot, we'll go over it again when we get to our coding part. But this is the end of the presentation part, and I'm going to switch. No, don't clap yet. We're not done. Okay, so I'm going to plug in my computer, and we're going to start working on the code. So I'm going to switch over to my laptop, and it's a little small for you guys to see, so I'm going to increase the size. All right, does anybody have any issues looking at the projector or what's on the screen? If not, then I take it that you guys are good with this. So if you already started your server, it should look something like this. And the last line should be server started on port 3000. So basically, the console right now is running your server, and you need to keep the window open at least for the server to work. I'm going to put this on my shirt. And now we're going to, whoops, I don't know what that did. And now we're going to open up the code. once you started this server on your computer, you could just leave it in the background. It just needs to be opened, but you don't need to like constantly look at it. So I'm going to have our code on the right. And I'm going to open up the index.html that's located inside the front end folder. So if you open it up, it should look something like this. Oh, so what I'm using here on the right is just an editor. It's a text editor called Atom. And imagine it kind of like an IDE with like no features. There are plugins that you can install to make it a little nicer to work with, and that's what I did. So I'm pretty sure everybody just has Eclipse installed, right? OK. I don't recommend you opening this in Eclipse because Eclipse is a little too much for like coding this. Yeah, if you have Notepad++, Sublime Text, or Atom, I would open the project with those, or Vim if you'd like to hurt yourself. I would open it up in those. But if you don't have those right now, you could either install it or just wait and follow along with our code. So this is the HTML file. And I've pre-written a few of the, well, I've pre-written the HTML and the CSS for our program. And if you look on the right, that is our to-do like web app. And like earlier when I brought up the alternative implementation, this opening up the HTML file is kind of like, it's local on your computer because it's already downloaded. Opening it up is similar to you looking for the file on a web server. Basically, it serves the same purpose, but I just basically didn't put it in a server, so you wouldn't have like a billion things running in your background, so you only have one like API server running in the background instead. So when you loaded this page up locally on your computer, it's essentially that like first request from the user to the server. And this is what you'll see. So by default, when the page doesn't have any data loaded, it will say loading. And then if you enter a user ID, it will look for all of the tasks that are part of the user or that are assigned to that user.